Okay. Um, Hello, everyone. We are with Dan Bloom. Dan Bloom is a very, very important therapist, professor, and writer and collaborator to the EHPG Mexico. Um, if you are more or less in the Gestalt environment, you should to know him. He has more than 30 years of experience in therapy. He's a professor. He's a therapist. He worked with all around the world in different publications and different institutions. And now we are very, very happy to have a little conversation with him about the new book, the Mexican edition of the Gestalt therapy, Therapy of the Situation of George Wallants. And to comment this text, we invite them and to know or to ask some interested or interesting things or questions or even concepts that maybe everybody want to know. So Dan, I want to ask you if you know the first time that you read the text of therapy of the Gestalt therapy. Therapy of the Situation.
It was probably about 10 years ago. It was published in 2007, I think. And I read it about 10 years ago, and it impressed me. But for some reason, it didn't impress me as much as it impressed me when I just read it.
Okay.
It was very interesting. Because between the time that I read it, the first time, the time I just read it, a lot of my ideas and my theory and practice grew much along with the ideas of George's ideas. And my understanding of Gestalt therapy and my understanding of the Gestalt therapy world changed, and much in sync with what George had been predicting, and much of what George had been describing. So now when I read this book, I saw that this is very much the way the Gestalt therapy world, as I understand it now, is alive.
Mm-hmm.
And to some extent, his book was a pioneering book,
Mm-hmm.
and is very. So revisiting the book was like a resurrection.
Okay, it's a very powerful word. Then maybe I think it's very, very necessary to ask you how can we understand the concept situation?
Yes, now that is very important. It's an alternative way of looking at field. We all understand Gestalt therapy is based upon the field. And I also know that in Spanish there's a little bit of campo and field and a little bit of way to understand field. But in field theory, we understand that experience is a function of the organism environment field. And somehow we all understand that almost as a cliche. Now, what George points out is that really what we're talking about is not field, but situation. And that's a more human way of looking at the field, because actually you and I are in a situation together.
Mm-hmm.
If we think about the world in that way, as that we're in a human situation, we already have a different way of looking at things. So he draws on the Gestalt psychologists to support this. And a situation is a broader concept than just a you and a me, and it's a focusing of the field in terms of the situation. It's very close to field. In fact, it is very close to field. Jean-Marie Robin talks about the situation instead of field. And right now in Gestalt therapy, we're talking about field in a wholly different way that's very close to the situation. Does that answer your question?
Yes, because maybe in the literature, in the Gestalt literature, we always read the concept situation, or feel, and for this reason, it's very, very important to have a very, very close meaning of the concept. I want to ask you, Dan, if the new ideas that you have about the therapy of the situation, or the field, that you are agree with Wallants, or with all the ideas that he presents.
Yes. Yes. The simple answer is yes. The differences are small, at least on a basic level. Differences are small. Wallants comes to Gestalt therapy from Gestalt psychology. It's a very, very important part of his book, which underscores how important this book is for all Gestalt therapists to know. So my agreement with this book is fundamentally my agreement with Gestalt psychology and my appreciation for Gestalt psychology's contribution to Gestalt therapy. My understanding of situation is just slightly different from George's. My approach to Gestalt therapy comes from phenomenology, which is different from Gestalt psychology, although it's very parallel. And there are differences, but mostly similarities. I could get into the differences, but that's really getting into details that may be not necessary. But fundamentally, situation is overlaps so much so that for our purposes, we can talk about the similarities, more importantly, the differences. In contemporary Gestalt therapy, we learn a lot more from looking at the situation, the therapy situation. Then I think we can look at differences between my idea of makeup.
Maybe then it's important for the people know the difference between the Gestalt psychology and the phenomenology just a little bit, because I know that everybody listening in classrooms or in other spaces about phenomenology and the Gestalt psychology. Then and now I remember your text, the parallel lines that intersect.
Oh yes. It's interesting. Gestalt psychology is a psychology, and it's based upon empirical study, and based upon observation and empirical method of observation and deducing from observation principles. Phenomenology is a reverse. It goes directly to experience and builds on from experience, and is a study of subjectivity and individual's experience. Phenomenology is a philosophy, and it's a method of exploring individual experience. One is empirical, and the other is it looks at subjectivity. That's phenomenology. Phenomenology, when we look at the phenomenological aspect of Gestalt therapy, we're paying attention to the structuring of experience. When we look at it from a Gestalt theoretical perspective, we're also looking at it in terms of the structuring of experience, but as a psychological approach, in terms of the structure of a psychology. In phenomenology, we have different, we pay attention to intentionality, consciousness, and built into phenomenology are concepts of meaning making, the worldhood of the world, as I said, intentionality, and what else can I say? And intersubjectivity, and empathy, and the boundaries, and the borders beyond which we can further explore this. We have ethics, we have aesthetics, the aesthetic criterion. These are all concepts coming out of phenomenology. Now, Gestalt psychology has notions of systems, force lines, vectors, life space. We have life space is a very important concept in Gestalt theory. It comes from Kurt either Levine or Levin, depending upon what Lewin, depending on what part of his life you want to look at. And these are the concepts in Gestalt psychology. Very parallel. You'll have some Gestalt therapists look at the Gestalt psychological approach, and they pretty much use the Gestalt psychologist. They are oriented to systems. Phenomenologists are oriented towards the structure of experience as it evolves, as emergent. There's an overlap, substantial overlap. You'll read when you get to Wallants' book, he has a section on phenomenology of Gestalt therapy. Gestalt therapists who tend to phenomenology in the Wallants perspective will reduce phenomenology to a simple 4 or 5 steps, which is okay. A clinical phenomenological approach, such as I take and some others take, is different. We look at a phenomenological approach as creating an opening, a space for the emergence of contacting. We don't look at it in terms of simple steps of bracketing and horizontalization and universalization, as he would put these simple steps. But we look at it in terms of allowing the emergence of something that has been hidden and appearing. That would be more of a phenomenological approach point of view in Gestalt therapy. It's different. They're very different.
Yes, I listen and I understand that the main idea is to keep an eye between the differences from a philosophy to the psychology or to the theory.
Yeah, and it's a difficult bridge to make, or it's a very simple bridge to make. I mean, it's difficult because philosophy is not science, and science is not philosophy, although there's a philosophy of science and there's a science of philosophy. So that's confusing.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think what are your advices to a reader to read Wallants' book? If someone want to get close to Wallants' book, do you have any advice to understand better?
It's a very easily understandable book.
Yes.
Some sections more understandable than others. If the first section ends with a series of summaries,
Mm-hmm.
his book has different elements to it, different levels of understanding. Some of his book is historical. Some of his book explains the physically important of the book itself. Some of the book contains examples of the therapy with his model. He gives references to Gestalt psychology itself and Gestalt theory itself, which is very useful. So that I don't think a person needs to have a background in Gestalt theory to understand the book. I think a person needs some openness to therapy, of course. A person doesn't need philosophy to understand this book. It's written for a general Gestalt therapist. It's written for a trainee. It has a definite sense of this being his summation of his work. Something that Malcolm Parlett wrote in the introduction is underscoring. It's about the internationality of Gestalt therapy. And this is appropriate for my speaking in English to a Mexican audience. And I say this when I speak in Mexico or elsewhere. Gestalt therapy was taught by Americans abroad in Europe, I think first in Europe. This is an effort. This is not just an effort. This is Europe taking, in a sense, Europe taking Gestalt therapy back, because the Perlses were European, brought Gestalt therapy to the United States. Fritz somehow brought it from New York to California and Americanized it. Laura never really Americanized Gestalt therapy. She taught Gestalt therapy in Europe, and she taught George. She was principal teacher of George's. So this is very much a Laura Perl's style of Gestalt therapy. And George, bringing in Gestalt psychologists, he reasserted the European roots of Gestalt therapy in this book. So in a way, he restored the European influence of Gestalt therapy. So it's an interesting way of looking at what this particular book is doing. And I found that very interesting. And it underscores how important this book really is.
Yes, I think the international help or the international history of the book is a very, very important idea or knowledge to get approach or get close to the book. And you said something interesting about the Malcolm Parlett collaboration, because he said that the book, the Wallants books, is a hologrammatic, like it's not an edition, like a hologrammatic approach maybe, because has philosophy, has therapy, have a lot of things, and it's very, very close, and have a lot of examples or even summaries, as you said. And can you talk a little bit more about the Laura Pearl's contributions?
Oh yeah, it's reading that book reminded me so much of how much I know of Laura. Uh, uh, all of it. That was my hesitation. How did I mean, to say something in Gestalt psychology? Had to choose a part from a whole. What I mean by all of it, a couple of things. In the very early part, he makes an aggressive attack on the Gestalt therapy that broke away from the Laura Pearlsian approach of fluidity, of Gestalt psychology, of support, of fluidity, of contacting. I said that twice. And he presents a body-oriented Gestalt therapy that is not body-oriented, but it was body which is intrinsic to experience. A notion of contacting that isn't a contacting, that is either you make it or you don't make it. He breaks away from the notion of a contact cycle and into a contacting which is a stream, which is always a contacting. Breaks away from a notion of resistance, which is something to be stopped. Breaks away from a notion of the interruptions of contacting that have to be uninterrupted. These are all part of Laura Pearl's teachings. Now, notice I went like that. Now, this is the Laura Pearl's gesture, because contacting is grace. This is something that you get out of George, because he will in between the lines, you'll see his references to various to Merleau-Ponty, to notions of the forming of a whole and of parts, and how parts cannot be understood without references to the whole, again and again and again and again. And these, my reading now, go directly to my understanding of the aesthetic of contact, the aesthetic criterion, the notions of the wholes, and my understandings of Husserl, my understandings of Merleau-Ponty, my understandings of all of the phenomenologists, who, by the way, were contemporary with the Gestalt psychologists. And so it's very interesting. So if you want to know Laura Pearl's work, you will read George. She was very important in Europe. She did a lot of her teaching. A lot of teaching in the United States.
Okay, you said a concept and a word that is very important to the students and to the therapists. That is the body, no? the meaning or the concept of the body in Gestalt therapy and even in phenomenology. And can you tell us a little bit more about body's work or body's concept?
First of all, it is as much a mistake to talk about the body as it is to talk about the mind, right? Because that's as much the split. But however, he mentions such words as body forth. Body is the way of expressing. We express ourselves fundamentally, what we see is we see each other fundamentally through the body. Now, uh, body and we are embodied creatures. We are embodied selves. We are embodied. We are embodied. What that means is that there's no separation, between what we experience, how we experience, and our sense of and our being embodied. Our embodiment is our experience. Our experience is an embodied experience. Our intersubjectivity is an intercorporeality, which means we're enlaced. Our bodies are enlaced with one another through our seeing of each other's bodies, through our feeling of each other's bodies, through the way our bodies register with each other. Now, that would be very much the notion of our lived body with each other. So when he writes about the body, he'll write about our body is ourselves in the world. As much as my voice is me in the world, my hand gesture is me in the world. The words, my tone of my voice is me in the world towards you. You're responding to me as I gesture is your body responding to me as I gesture. Your head is shaking in agreement or not, or that is your body reciprocally responding to me. So we're bodies with one another, but we're people with one another. So the body is just a way of articulating that aspect of our being together. There's nothing special. I think he would mention this in one way or another. Nothing particularly special, and there's nothing particularly not special. So I have my own thing about people who say they do body work. Does that mean? What about people who do mind work? It might as well be one or the other. We're wholes.
I find very, very interesting that you say, because it is true. The body has as an editor, I have very, very big problems with the concept of a body for embodiment in Spanish.
Oh.
It's not easy to translate or to interpret that concept. So we decided to keep the concept in English. So, and we wrote editor's note because it's a very, very, very interesting and big problem for us in Spanish.
I love that, because we in English will learn something from Spanish in that difficulty in translation. It's like when in Merleau-Ponty, we can't translate into English the things he means in French. So we have no way of knowing what he meant.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yes. Very, very interesting.
So the meaning of embodiment is somewhere between that translation, somewhere at that edge between my words and your translation is some meaning that neither one of us can grab.
Yes, completely agree. And I hope the readers share this discussion, because it's very important and very interesting.
Yes. So that goes to the id of the situation, which he writes a lot about.
Yes.
Now that goes to an area you asked about: agreement, not agreement. And that brings in Jean-Marie, that brings in PhD, and brings me into this. I have substantial agreement with him on the id of the situation, and I think the id of the situation is also the it of the situation. I think it's translated into Spanish as, how do you?
Ello.
Right. And so we in English are stuck with the bad word, because it's not an id of the situation. It's an it of the situation. So I always translate it into English as the it of the back translated as it of the situation. So we in English can understand what the hell they're talking about, because it's an it. Now that's a wonderful concept, because it tells you about the situation. There's nothing mysterious about it. There's an unnameable experience called the it of the situation. Now, the disagreement I have with him is about his relationship to self. He throws out the whole notion of self. I think he throws out the baby with the bathwater. He throws in an important clinical piece, and that I can have a discussion with anybody about. And he there's a question about contacting. Where does contacting begin? Does it begin where in the situation does contacting occur? Now, I would like to have a discussion with him about what his sense of the situation is in terms of contacting. And this is the current discussion in Gestalt therapy about emergence. If it's emergent of the field and it's emergence of the situation, what exactly do we mean? Is there a experience that is prior to the it of the situation? We don't know. We have to work with a moment when we take it. When we can do an experiment when we quiet down and experience ourselves as quietly as we can. And is there an instant before we first feel something? I think people who meditate have that experience of the place of before any experience happens. Is that part of should we account for that in our understanding of experience? He also doesn't write about contact boundary. Mm-hmm. And I think contact boundary is one of the most important neglected phenomenological pieces of Gestalt therapy, because it's the contact boundary, as we have in Pearl, Cephalon, and Goodman, is the place, location where experience occurs, and that is a powerful concept. And he gives it one paragraph.
Yes.
And, it deserves a book.
Then I want to ask you about in the aspects of contact, your vision or your opinion about the psychopathology, because Wallants wrote more or less one chapter about it, and I want to ask you that your opinion about contact and psychopathology, and the psychopathology or illness in the situation.
Yeah. I'm pretty close to the field emergent concept, which means a person doesn't have psychopathology. The situation is psychopathological.
Okay.
I think he's right about. I completely agree with that. It's the intrapsychic is questionable. A person comes into psychotherapy who's suffering, and we call that psychopathology, typically. But it's a situation that's suffering. It's the person in a situation that's suffering. And the person brings that into the therapy session, and we work with the suffering in the therapy session. That's so. Johnny Fantasetti talks about the psychopathological field, and depression and all those other things, and that makes a lot of sense. That does not mean that a person doesn't have also a particular history, a particular life story, a particular structure that repeats a kind of experience of the situation that person is bringing into the therapy session, that gets articulated. What I mean by articulated, that the structure, the shape of it alters the experiences. It alters the shape of the situation that comes up as the figure is emerging of the therapy session. That is altering the form of that particular shape of the situation, and that would be particular to the person. because I think Jean-Marie makes that point. You're not something like that. It's the person you're working with, not the relationship. Who's paying your fee? Who's the person who has to go home to his family, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's very true, because well, the reality of the daily life of the person is not in the office. It's in with their families or in their work. And then, can you tell us a little bit more about the suffering of the situation?
Yeah. And let me know if I'm talking too quickly. Yeah, it just occurred to me that I don't want to create a suffering of the situation here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah. Oh. Yeah. The hesitation is two directions. One is to go off on the notion of what suffering actually means. In the word, to suffer is to carry. That's the root in whatever is Latin root, I guess. To suffer is to carry, is to bear. And you're carrying a weight. And it's also the root of patient. A patient has a weight, bears a suffering. It's pathos. Those are the roots of those words. So to suffer in a situation is to be weighed down by something. And there are various kinds of suffering, and the sufferings we give them clinical names. Now, here's where phenomenology comes in, and this is where phenomenology is important. I never gave that a proper answer to you. But here's where phenomenology opens the door.
okay.
Phenomenology can name these sufferings. Phenomenology, through Heidegger, for example, is able to looks at the concept of mood and looks at things like existential feelings, looks at things of moodedness, the kinds of things that stir a person from their very soul. Now, Gestalt psychology, as far as I know, doesn't do this, but looks at the things that are part of the colors and shapes and tastes of what it is to be a human being. And those are the parts that can be caught up and tied and caught in the knots of suffering. A person suffers in a session because this person is choking on what it means to be a human being, one way or another. A person is frozen in anxiety. A person vomits forth depression. A person is struck homeless, even though he lives at home. A person is terrified by nothing. Now, these are the feelings we're working with in a therapy session. This is what phenomenology teaches us, because phenomenology gives us the roadmap to be able to move in this direction. Now, some phenomenology gives us insights and where how to go, what sort of a road, where this can go, and some phenomenology just gives us patience in this. So a lot of phenomenology parallels Gestalt psychology, but a lot of the phenomenology goes elsewhere. And then there's the whole thing about life space, life world. That's another piece. You see, that's where I go with phenomenology, where I find more richness than in Gestalt psychology. Gestalt psychology feels a little more sterile, a little more sterile, and I offer to people who've reading Wallants and his description of Lewin and Lewin's description of life space reduced to a mathematical formula, to wonder whether or not that is that's consistent with as humanistic an approach to human suffering as you like. That's a better answer to your earlier question.
Yes, perfectly. Good. I want to ask you then about how contemporary do you think is Wallants' text?
Very. I mean, that's one way to answer. Yes. it's so contemporary that I was annoyed that when I reread it, that I had submitted a paper last week for a book that's going to be published, and I just wrote my editor and asked if I could rewrite a section of it.
Okay.
To add some moments, because I forget, what? How can I not remember that to cite George in this? So don't include that.
Well, it's funny and interesting that and don't worry, we want to review.
The question is very, very current. When I speak to my colleagues in Europe, and I say, "Of course, everyone's reading it." Yeah, it's absolutely contemporary, and not only is it contemporary, but it's kind of, well, it's an important summary of a foundation for a kind of Gestalt therapy practice today that I think is important. I think we know. I mean, I know with a lot of my colleagues in the Spanish-speaking world that there are other kinds of Gestalt therapy practice that are a little more casual in their approach, and this supports a much more foundational Gestalt therapy.
Okay. Yes, I wanted to ask about the contemporary because when we, as an institute, reread Wallants, we notice that it's very, very interesting and it's very contemporary and important to us and to the students and to other therapists have these concepts and these ideas and teach these ideas. Then we are talking about body, about field, about situation, about psychopathology and other concepts. But do you think are other like key concepts that you want to share with us about Wallants' book?
Those are very good. Those are very key. The situation, the therapy of the situation. I think these, those are. I think you cover. Let me take a look at. Let me just take a look at his. Those are critical. Support, and the importance of resistance as assistance. The importance of rejecting interruptions or reformulating interruptions, and the importance of seeing contacting as a process, not as an on-off switch. I think that's such an important change. I bring that wherever I go, and I always find a little uncomfortable when somebody tells me I'm not making contact.
Mm-hmm.
Even the notion of when somebody says to somebody, "Go self-regulate," I say, I really think, what are you really saying? You're telling that person to go get lost, or shut up. If you think about one of the things I don't agree with again, or I think he underemphasizes, is maybe he doesn't, but is his relationship, is the emergent quality of relationships, the intersubjectivity. He leans a little bit too much on, I think, at least on my last reading, on the notion of separateness in the relationship. One of Husserl's problems with intersubjectivity was he never got over the fact he never could figure out how you and how I can know you're another person there, and he had what he called that I know you're there because you have a body, I have a body, I see you moving, I move, I know how my hand feels when I move. I see you moving your hand, so you must feel what I feel, therefore you have an intersubject. And that's sort of kind of a funny way of thinking about intersubjectivity. And he seems to include that as how the Gestalt psychologists do it. That's weak. That's a
I have a curiosity then, as an editor, as a teacher, that if you need to write some notes to the Wallants book, um, do you write some ideas for get closer to the book, or like an editor, or like a key ideas, or like recommendations, advices to the readers?
I might.
Okay. um like what, like which ones,
Like, what would I say?
mhm.
I would say sort of what I said. I would point out how important it is that he's addressing a certain style of Gestalt therapy, correcting what he thinks is a correcting of a particular dominance, what he thinks is a dominant style of Gestalt therapy. But God knows, as far as I know, some of the institutes in the United States teach some of what he's criticizing. At least last time I checked in. I'll let you know next week. I'm going to teach a course starting next week. But they teach some of what it's there. That he makes a very strong case for the Perl-Safran and Goodman model. He makes a very strong case for a Gestalt theoretical model. Even more than that, and I didn't mention this. My understanding is that there in Europe there's a Gestalt theoretical psychotherapy and a Gestalt therapy. The Gestalt theoretical therapists want nothing to do with Gestalt therapists. They think Gestalt therapists don't deserve the name Gestalt therapy because they don't understand Gestalt theory. It's not just in Europe. There was a Gestalt psychologist faculty at a university in New York, a famous university, famous Gestalt psychologist. A lot of Gestalt psychologists taught there. Wrote an essay attacking Fritz Perls, daring to use the word Gestalt for Gestalt therapy because he didn't know anything about Gestalt theory. So Gestalt theoretical psychotherapists want nothing to do with Gestalt therapy. And some of the people like Margarita Spinola-Loeb present at their conferences, and there's movement to try to get Gestalt therapists to present and be part of the Gestalt theoretical. So there's something going on there. George draws on the Gestalt theoretical therapists and brings that into this book. So there's an overlap there, which is an important overlap. Now, I don't know enough about I guess you call it politics, but I think that there's something going on here. That he's trying to teach Gestalt therapists that we have a basis in Gestalt theory. And he makes reference after reference after reference to Gestalt theorists, which taught me something. Now, I learned Gestalt theory here, and he named names that I haven't heard since my early training, and that was only casually. I was taught Gestalt theory as a Gestalt therapist. I was taught Gestalt therapy, only casual references. So this is an important part of his book. He was a Gestalt theoretician.
It's a very, very important point, because I ignore it, this this little thing, and little important of politics and ideology.
Yeah. And people like Johnny Francisetti and Margarita are connected to the Gestalt theoretical. I don't know that much more than that, but there's trying to get these things together more, get more respect. And you can look on their website. They do therapy. And he describes the Gestalt theoretical approach to therapy in that book. So that would be something that I would ask a reader to pay attention to try to get a Gestalt therapist to keep their eyes open to the other world, which this opens a little bit to. Oh, this is 2007. I wonder what happened in the 13 years since.
Okay. That's true. Then even all our conversation is your opinion about parts of the book. I want to ask you your general opinion about Wallants' book. Like why a student need to read it, or why not a student or a therapist need to read it?
Yeah, I can't think of a reason why not. I think I have every reason to read it. I would hope that the person would first get some understanding of Pearl, Zefferland, and Goodman, because without that, the context is a little lost. And I say Pearl, Zefferland, and Goodman. I used to say read it cover to cover. I no longer say that. But to get some understanding of what this stands on, and to get some understanding of that. But I think that this book is one of the books to read to get an understanding of the basis of Gestalt therapy. I would put this right there. I think I would include this as a really important book. I can't think of a reason why not.
Okay. Well, I agree with you, because I found this book very, very educational, or like useful, like a tool to get ideas about Gestalt therapy and Gestalt concepts in general. So then to finish our conversation, I want to ask you if you have some kind of recommendation to read this book. Like, do I or do the person, do the people need to know something before read Wallants' book? As you said, that it's very simple text, and you don't have to know a lot of theories, a lot of concepts, a lot of context. But what is your recommendation to before to read Wallants' book?
Yeah, that's a good question, because I may be speaking too soon. I don't know who's reading it. What level a person begins. The first book I read in Gestalt therapy was Joel Latner's Gestalt therapy book. That was my very first book in Gestalt therapy. So that I always think that was my way in. It was serious enough, and it was, at least when I read it, it felt easy enough to give me the concepts. But I'm looking at the book as I pick it up, and it seems quite straightforward to me. It is also not a simple book, in the sense it's not a cartoon book. This is a book for psychotherapists. So would be not a book you'd give your brother to read who wants to know what is Gestalt therapy. This is a book for people who want to know what Gestalt therapy is, who want to be Gestalt therapists, who have a serious interest in Gestalt therapy. So this would be a book for trainees, or people who want to be trainees, or are thinking about becoming trainees. And I'd say for therapists who need to be things clarified.
Okay. Then, do you want to say something else about the text or the ideas to us?
I've said a lot, and it's an impressive book. It's clearly a book that he summarized everything. In reading it, I kept thinking, I'm sorry that he's not alive anymore. He was a nice man, and I'd like to have written to him and told him how much I enjoyed rereading this book. He's very well liked. No, it's a good book. Fortunately, it's in print. And better yet, it's going to be in Spanish.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, it's our first Mexican edition. So we hope that a lot of people can read it and get interested in the book.
Yeah. Yeah.
So then I want to say thank you for this time, for all your kindness, and for your knowledge. And thank you.
Oh, always my pleasure. It's always great to visit your institute.
Okay, thank you very much, Dan. So we want to keep in contact. And I think Fer is there. Fer, ¿estás por ahí?
Aquí estoy.
Okay.
See you, Dan. I hope to see you soon.
Yeah. Hope everybody's healthy and well.
We're doing well.
That's good.
Until this moment, everything is all right. Thank you for asking, Dan.
Yeah.
We hope you're doing well too.
I got this.
Yeah, big hugs to you.
Yeah, I'll give my love to everybody.
Okay, thank you very much.
We will. Thank you for everything. I will end up the broadcasting.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.